Hey, welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about the logic operators or modules in Bitwig Studio and in the grid. And I saw a lot of comments on Facebook and YouTube, and someone on Patreon wrote me if I can do a video for each module in the grid. And I said most of the modules in the grid are basically pretty simple. You can describe them in a sentence. But what people want to know is what can you do with it. So in this video I want to try out and try to explain what you can do with the logic modules and yeah, how they work. And if you have this button here, it's basically the simplest possible logic module you can have, and it shows exactly what it's all about in these logic modules. It's about having a 0 value or a +1 value. 0 and +1. That's basically all about this. All these modules here are working in this type of value range. There's no in between. And yeah, it's all about turning something on or off. So binary, if you will. So the next module we have is this trigger module here. And it does basically the same as the button, where you can turn the value to 1 and 0 at will. With this trigger module here, you have basically a short burst of value of 1. So if you push this, you can see, and if you try to hold it, it still releases only a short burst amount of time of the value of 1. And when you use this gate length here and combine it with the trigger signal, you can change how long this burst is. Now we have 100 milliseconds here. So this is basically the function of the gate length module. And when we go back to our button here, where we can choose to have value 1 as long as possible, or as long as we want, and then we go back to 0 when we want, we can use this gate length here and turn this to a trigger. So we use a short amount of time, 30 milliseconds here, and then it goes back to 0. So if I press this button, it goes on the value, and then after 30 milliseconds it goes back to 0. And that's all you can do with this gate length module. But when you combine it in the right order or in the right place in your patch, then you can do much more with it, of course. So it's more of an utility, if you so want. So let's remove the wires here. And let's use the gate repeat. Use it with a button. And now we can choose to repeat our input signal, which is +1, and repeat it every 50 milliseconds. And it looks like this. We can change the length. And it almost looks like an square wave. And you can use this to output sound, or you can basically forward it directly to your audio out. And I use an attenuate here to change the volume of it. And let's hear. So it sounds like a square wave. But as you can see, we go from 0 to +1. But if you send this to your speakers, your membrane of your speaker goes basically from the middle position to the outward position, so +1. But we need to go the full range, so swing it back in and back out. So we have to convert the signal, this unipolar signal, to a bipolar signal. And you can do this easily when you go to level here and use this uni-to-bi module. As you can see, now we have the full range, and now we have a real square wave. So this is basically a conversion you have to do, and you can convert, of course, back if you want, or just remove both of them. So now we used a logic signal as an audio output, and this tells you that in the grid you can combine different type of signals, and it doesn't matter. So for instance, we generated our logic signal here with the button. But we can also go to oscillators here and use a pulse. Remove this repeat here and use this. Or completely change the square wave of this oscillator with our logic here and use the gate length. So we use an audio input for a logic module, and we get something different out. And then we need to convert it, of course, to a bipolar signal. So now this logic gate length module, which is intended for logic values, is used for audio amplitudes, and with the gate length we now can do something like a pulse width with like you do on synthesizers, right? So this is now not a logic module anymore. So this is why it's hard to describe what you can do with most of the modules, because you can use them in different circumstances, in different contexts, and it gives you so much different results, and there's not only one single purpose for a module. So let's remove that and just stick to the logic category here, and let's see what we have now. Let's remove this trigger and this button too and go to the clock divide. So, and now for the clock divide, we use again a button and the gate repeat. So we have an ongoing signal. Okay. And let's change the color. Oh no, it's not possible. So let's go in the clock divide here. And you can see we have now this number running. And every time this number passes this bottom number here, it goes back to 0. And if you use a button and trigger this jack below, you can reset. So as you can see, it goes up to 8 and then, or 7, and then goes back to 0 again. But when we push this button before it goes to 0 again, we can reset it to 0. Or actually use a trigger, yeah, it's better. So every time I press this, it resets to 0. And the output is only one burst of the value of 1 when you reach the maximum number, which is 8. So you can divide your signal into sub-signals. So let's use maybe some kind of different module here in between, so we have a different color. So this is the red is our original signal, and the clock divide divides this signal into different sub-signals. And you can choose how much and when this happens. Let's actually use 2. I think it's better to see. So the red one is our original signal generated by the gate repeat. And then the clock divide is basically dividing this into a sub grid. So back to the logic, and let's use the clock quantize here. The clock quantize is useful when you have a trigger signal and you want this trigger signal to start exactly on a specific point in time. So let's use, I have to look at the, so we have the clock in at the bottom. So let's use this here. And let's use this. So we see exactly what's happening. And we have a trigger signal going into the top. And now when I press this button here, I use another one. When I press this trigger button here, you can see that it's different here than here. You can see it basically synchronizes with our original gate repeat signal. Let's remove the clock divide so we see this better. So this is basically our grid, and if I push this button here, it waits until our clock signal synchronizes. This is basically useful when you are here in our sequencer and you start a sequence, and this waits until a bar is over and then start exactly at the first beat. So it's kind of that kind of thing. So with the clock quantize, you can quantize a signal to a clock signal. And you go with the clock signal in the bottom jack, and your trigger signal goes in the top jack. Okay, let's remove this. Now we have our gate repeat, gate length, clock quantize, clock divide. Okay, these and button and trigger. This one we explained already. Now we have this latch module here. And this is easy to explain. Let's go in the bottom jack first. So when you trigger the bottom jack with a signal, the output signal goes to 1, as you can see here. And it stays at 1. To bring it back to 0, you have to use the top input to set it to 0, as you can see here. So pretty easy, right? The middle jack is basically a toggle where you can toggle the current state to the opposite one. So at the moment we are at 0, and we trigger this, we go to 1. And now when we are at 1, we trigger this again, we go back to 0. So it's basically a toggle. Also for itself, it's not very useful. But when you have a big patch and you need some kind of this logic somewhere, then it's pretty useful. So this is also why it's hard to make tutorials about these modules, because there are so many possibilities and outcomes and you can't explain every one of them. So let's remove this. Okay, now we have all these first ones here explained. Now we have these comparable modules where we can compare different signals. And the first difference you notice is that we have now red inputs, which means this is intended for audio signals. You can of course use it for logic signals too, but it's more intended for audio signals. And this says comparator assessing if two signals are roughly equal. So we have now a signal going out because the input of the bottom and the top input are the same, which is 0. And this is 0 because these two inputs are different. Now it's the same again, so we have a 1 going out. Okay, and this is more useful for when you have maybe some different audios going in here. And you maybe ask yourself, why is the output so strange? And if we go into a different oscilloscope here, use the, this is an input, and this is an input. So you can see these two signals are not the same, but at some point in time they are overlapping. So we have here a -1 and we have here a -1. And if they meet, then we have a signal going out. Okay, that's basically what this module does. It compares the two signals, and when they are roughly the same, something is going out, a signal, a logic signal that says, hey, now the signal is the same. I hope this is explained well. So you can basically create a logic signal with two audio signals by comparing them. And the rest of the modules are all the same. They're doing exactly the same stuff, just with different types of comparisons. So we have here an assessing if one signal is either greater than or equal to another. So it's a different comparison, but the function is basically the same. And at the end here, we have these logic functions where you can input not audio signals, but it's the mainly purpose is logic inputs. So let's go with the trigger here. So this is an easy, it's basically just outputting the opposite value as you input. So when I input 1, it outputs 0, and if I input 0, it outputs 1. So this is basically the NOT module, pretty easy. Then we have the AND, and I have to use button here. This is 1, and this is 1, then the output is also 1. Something different, then the output is 0. Only when two of the input signals are 1, the output is also 1. Okay, pretty simple. Let's exchange that for OR. Turn this off. The output is 1 when input 1 is 1, or output 2 is 1, or output 1 is 1 and output 2 is 1. Then output is 1. Isn't that simple? So you have at least one of the inputs at value 1 to have an outgoing signal of 1. Pretty logic. Then you exchange this for XOR, which is roughly the same. So 1, output A is 1, output B is 1, then output is 0, not 1. That's the difference between XOR and OR. When you have both of the inputs are at 1, then the output is 0. If you exchange this for OR, then the output is 1. So it's basically a bit, the constraints are a bit harder. So the description says logic gate seeking only one input to be true. So only one input signal needs to be true to have an outgoing signal of 1. So, and the rest of these modules here are exactly the same. So they have the same function. Only the comparison or the logic comparisons are different. And yeah, you can read what they actually do in the help here. And you can see there are also truth tables where you can see when you have an input of 0 at A and 0 at B, then it outputs in 1. If you have an input of 1 at A and 0 at B, it outputs 1, and so forth and so on. So it's even, you even have a table where you can see what the output is when you are inputting different values. So I think this describes pretty much all the logic modules. I didn't describe what you can do with it, so practical tips, because I have none. But when I create some instruments in the future and I use one of these functions, I will make, of course, an overview over my presets and why I used at some point some of the modules. But for now, out of the blue, describing what you can do with this, I have no idea. Actually, we can try and construct some use case. And for instance, we have logic here and we take this, for instance, and let's take 2 audio signals, maybe a sine wave going in here, and use a saw wave going in the second one. And now we are comparing these 2 oscillators. And this is comparator assessing if one signal is either greater than or equal to another. Then it outputs a logic signal of 1. As you can see, there are coming a lot of 1s out of this module already. And then we take a select module here, and you can see we have an input for logic here at the top. And when we choosing this, you can now see we switch between these 2 input jacks here. So it takes either one or the other input. And now we go in with our oscillator here, and let's use an oscilloscope so we can see what's going on. You can see we have a very strange waveform here going out, because we switch between a sine wave and a sawtooth pretty fast on the base of this comparison modules here. So when one signal is basically greater or equal to the other signal, then it switches the path to the different oscillator. And we have now this pretty strange waveform going out. So let's look what's going on here. This is sine wave, and this is our sawtooth. And when these 2 are compared and we use this for the switch, then we have this outgoing signal here at the top. So very strange one. Sounds like this. And let's maybe change this comparison module here to a different one. You can see the wave is changing. So this is maybe one use case where you can create a more complexer wave form out of this select module and this comparison modules from the logic category. Yeah. So this is maybe how we can use it. But there are lots of more of these use cases, and that's just one of them. Yeah, I think that's it for this video. I hope I explained everything pretty well and made no errors or explained something wrong. Comment under this video, ask me questions, and if you want to see some longer tutorials for some of the modules, then yeah, also write me. And when I do some instruments in the future in the grid, I try to go over the patch and explain why I use some of the modules and how. And I think that's a better approach to some of the grid modules, and not like go over each of these modules and explain what you can do with it. I know Brian Bowman did a nice and very beloved series on YouTube where he goes over each device in Bitwig Studio, but some of the devices of Bitwig are much more complex, so you have more like a pretty distinctive use case for each of the devices, so it's better to explain. But in the grid, as I said, most of the modules are pretty simple and easy to understand, but you can use them in multiple ways. And yeah, so yeah, thanks for watching, and subscribe to the channel, subscribe on Patreon, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.